All right. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk through each one at each time. Okay. So I'm not going to throw the world at you at once. So initially here, we're going to talk through bands. And side note, outside of this, I was looking for banded deadlift pictures, and there are 0 girls on Google Images with banded deadlift pictures, and I was going to go crazy. So Navi, Leah, we're going to get some good banded pictures up there. But initially, when we're talking about bands, like I said, is that over umbrella topic of accommodating resistance. So you utilize bands when you want to make a movement, in this case, more difficult during a certain phase of an exercise. So if you guys can look in here, if you're on your phone or computer, you'll see this guy right here. He has a band basically anchored at the front, comes all the way up over the deadlift bar and anchored at the back. Same thing for the other side. Do not just do it on one side, okay? So because it's banded on both sides here in the platform, what this specifically does is it adds more resistance at the top or end range of that motion. So as you're pulling off the floor, the bands have very little tension in them. But as you pull, it feels like you're pulling more weight because that band has a lot more tension at the top. Okay. And so as I'm pulling through that band, I'm really working on that end range of motion or that lockout. Along with that, band's going to want to pull you forward. So it's going to work heavily on upper body bracing. And like I said, the extensors as you're going to that lockout. Okay. So this would be, for example, if you struggle with your lockout or you want to really accentuate those glutes and hamstrings at the top, you would add a banded deadlift on to really help you with that part of it. Okay. And so like it is here, you'll be less tension at the bottom, still feel a little bit, but then you'll really pull through that. And I mean, you can have upwards of 100+ pounds of band tension at the top. Okay. If you have ever done this before, you understand this. It feels so weird when you pull the band for the first time because it pulls you forward. You feel like you have to be so particular about the details of this because it will expose your weaknesses in the best way. Okay. And like I said here, how you would add that, different bands have different tension. So if you guys have seen like the little skinny orange bands, you usually wouldn't use those, but you could use the skinny orange bands. A lot of people use the red bands, or you can use multiple bands at one time, or these guys are super heavy. These are the green bands. Okay. These all add different amounts of tension, obviously at the top, but throughout that whole range of motion. Liz, I see your little boy. So if you're thinking, well, Kelsey, I kind of suck at the lockout, or hey, I really want to focus on more of those glutes hamstring, this could be a really good option, along with you having to brace heavily and use your upper body because it's going to want to pull you forward. Okay. Like I said, when you first deadlift with this, it is wild. It feels crazy. Okay. So that is bands. Any question on that one? You can put them in the chat too. Okay. Bands, accommodating resistance, obviously adds more resistance at the top end, AKA your lockout. And so this would be beneficial if you want to work on the lockout or it's a weakness for you. Or if you just want to add a little bit of variability, I personally just like training with bands too, because it adds a little bit of variability. That can also be beneficial. Bands, number one. Secondly, many of you might have never seen this before. Type in the chat, have you guys ever seen reverse bands? Kel, I don't know if you have at 614 or not. Reverse bands. Kel said no. Shell, have you seen it? No. Ooh, this is going to be a new topic. This is good. Okay. For squatting, yep. So Hallie said for squatting, you can use this squatting, you can use this bench, you can use this in multiple things. So like I said, this is kind of the absolute opposite of what I just shared with what the bands were prior. Okay. This is still accommodating resistance. Like I said, in accommodating resistance, you make a movement more difficult or easier during a certain phase of that motion. This one specifically, if you look at this fella here, he has bands anchored at the top of his rack, even though you can't see it. It's all the way down towards his deadlift, or geez Louise, his bar, and then it's all the way back up. So that band is pulling from the top and it's hanging onto that deadlift bar at the bottom. Okay. So what this band does is, like I said, the opposite of what I just shared, what normal bands do, is it adds more assistance, especially at the bottom of your deadlift. So you can either overload your deadlift. Say you're working with a 100% plus, you want to load on 105% on your deadlift. Can you do 105%? No, because your 100% is what it is. This can get you to still feel that weight, but help in that range of motion, accommodate or assist you, especially at the bottom. This one specifically is actually super fascinating to train on. This is less resistance as you continue the pull. So obviously there's more band tension at the bottom. As you pull, that tension gets less and less and less because that band shrinks. And so when you're almost in your full lockout position, it is very minimal band depending on what bands you use. Okay. So what this one will help you with, like I said, not make more difficult, but helps you with the first pull or off the floor, or in this case, specifically where his range of motion, where he wants to work with it. Once again, kind of visualize for me because Hallie brought it up. Same thing for bench. You can do the same exact setup for bench and same exact setup for squat right there. Okay. This one, like similar to the last one, this will add X amount of pounds of assistance. The other one was resistance. This is assistance. And so this one you can use orange, red, greens, whatever bands that you want to use. Obviously, the less thickness of the band, the less assistance is going to be. Okay. More thick, more assistance, less thick, way less assistance. You're damn right, Carrie Droplik. If I just had you guessing what you should use that would be challenging. But yes, we will put in your app training specifically if you want to add bands in. And if you're curious about this, Care, talk with Nav about it, because I bet she would have a lot of things up her sleeves to help you with it. Okay. So that is really cool to train with. Personally, guys, if you're thinking of, hey, where do I start in this? Definitely do not start with reverse bands, because this is one of the most challenging to really get good at with the setup. So, like I said, they're completely different, but that one is resistance. This one can help you. Cool. Any questions about that one?
Kels, can I go back to, well, I guess it accommodates for either. For attaching bands, obviously it's going to depend on the rack you have. Does it have to be anchored into the floor for deadlift ones? Or does it depend?
You can do it, Shell, your setup at home, for example.
Yeah.
You want to make sure it's very stable. So I'll tell you a hack to do it at home. But if you were going to tell me, all right, Kelsey, I have these two things kind of in the ground, there's no way that's going to be beneficial, because you're going to pull them up with the things.
Yeah.
Actually, Jared drilled 2 deadlift things in my garage because we were training during COVID with it. But a way to do this at home, and I'll share with you guys a picture, I'll pull it up after we're done, is you can actually have, it's not the safest, so asterisk this, but you can put a band underneath your feet, loop it on the bar, and so you can still pull, but you're pushing that band away with your foot, and you're pulling that band with your other part of your body.
Cool.
So I'll show you a picture of that.
Cool. Thank you.
But please do not put dumbbells on the ground if they're not 100+ pounds. Do not use dumbbells. It's going to be shooting everywhere. Good question though. Okay, stock bands, reverse bands. Last you hear, chains. So I want you to think what we talked about 2 slides ago. Bands are very similar to chains, a bajillion times louder. Okay, so once again, this is accommodating resistance. I know I keep saying that to really burn it in our brains. So this is when we want to make that movement more difficult during certain phases of this exercise. Similar to bands 2 slides ago, this is very similar concept. Okay. So what bands do, what chains do here is they add more resistance, especially at the top end of that range of motion. Very similar to what the bands were. Okay. So when you're going, I want you to visualize kind of you setting up for a deadlift. There's chains over top your bar, hence this guy right here. Okay. At the bottom, you're pulling. As you pull, the weight of the chains get heavier because there's more chains that basically levitate. Levitate's not the great word, but you know what I'm talking about, like raise from the ground, right? And so as I'm pulling, more weight, because those chains go with you. Okay. It's still pretty damn heavy at the bottom, obviously, because there's chains on it, but it really works as you're pulling through that part of it. Okay. Once again, this works all ranges of motion. However, this is specifically really good for the lockout, really good for upper body, really good for bracing and your extensors. Once again, this adds X amount of pounds at the top. So this one, very similar. You can actually obviously weigh the chains because they are weighted. So this one, you're not necessarily guesstimating on that, but you're really focusing, you're really focusing on adding more weight at the top. And I think some do. Carrie, she said, I used to think guys just use chains to look cool. I swear 80% of guys don't know what they're doing with the chains, especially at the big Globo gyms. But the ones that do know what they're doing, there's a method to the madness, promise. But it looks cool on Instagram. So I think that's also a reason why. But like I said, with chains here, these can vary in size and weight. And so you want to definitely make sure that you have the same amount of chains on each side around the same place on your bar. For example, if this dude were to put his chains on the inside of the bar, which you can do, and this was on the outside of the bar, which is you can do, that would change the weight of that bar. Okay, kind of visualize that. So you want to make sure that the chains are in the same spot inside, outside of the bar as you pull. Okay. Any questions on that, guy? This is fascinating stuff, right? This is like kind of like the next level that is really interesting to learn. Really interesting to learn. So like I said, bands accommodating resistance, chains accommodating resistance, and then reverse bands accommodating resistance, but it helps you. Okay.